Final panel for today, looking at global challenges in thinking about legal capacity and independent living, intersectional responses. So I'm not going to go, the full biography of all of the speakers is in the programme, so I won't go through it, but just briefly introduce our first speaker this afternoon is Michael Mashenka, Executive Council Member of the Africa Disability Forum, and also Executive Director at Users and Survivors of Psychiatry in Kenya. Also a long-time friend of the summer school and a frequent visitor to Galway. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And as always, it's such an honor and privilege to be speaking at the summer school this year. I want to reflect on my presentation based on three things. First of all, it's basically looking at the existing legal framework, both from the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and also a bit of reflection on the recently adopted African Disability Protocol. Then I'm going to look at the issue of intersectionality, but with a deeper thinking around the social construct and the social norms within society. And I think lastly, I'm going to give practical examples in terms of Article 12 on the right to legal capacity, and also on Article 19 on independent living and being included in the community, looking at what are the practical realities for persons with disabilities with a very specific focus, of course, in an African context. So I want to say that legal capacity is important because it goes beyond decision-making to the core of what it means to be human. Without legal capacity, our freedom to make choices is greatly diminished, yet life choices are part of who we are. Having all or most decisions made for a person teaches them dependence and helplessness, which devalues their humanity. Without legal capacity, many, if not all, rights becomes meaningless. For example, the right to own property, the right to a private life, the right to work, the right to political participation, the right to free and informed consent in the context of healthcare. And I think Article 19 of the Convention is super important because it lays down some fundamental and core elements, specifically in the context of disability. First is the concept of self-determination, autonomy, equal access, living in the community, inclusion, and participation. However, even as we discuss the broader theme of intersectionality, we must recognize the contextual realities of persons with disabilities in relation to them enjoying the right to legal capacity and independent living. And I just want to specifically highlight that recently we adopted the African Disability Protocol, which is intended to address continued exclusion, harmful practices, and discrimination affecting persons with disabilities. And it have a very specific reference to women with disabilities, youth with disabilities, children with disabilities, and also the elderly. So, I want to look at the concept of intersectionality beyond the issue of identity. So I think for me, it goes beyond gender, it goes beyond disability, but rather, we must look at other underlying issues within the social construct of our society. And for that, I want to reflect on a couple of contextual issues within the African context, especially in relation to the rights of persons with disabilities to exercise legal capacity and to live independently and being included in the community on an equal basis with others. And I think my first point, even as we discuss intersectionality, is to understand the contextual issues. So we live in a society, for example, where deprivation of legal capacity is highly informal. So it's not about court processes. Most people don't make decisions because their families and their communities will not allow them to do so. But we have very little in terms of people going to court when we have issues of legal capacity. When we reflect on intersectionality and independent living, one of the core areas of consideration is that mostly within an African perspective, you live in a very communal way. So there are other overarching factors about balancing collective responsibility in the community versus individual rights within community. So that's why I'm saying beyond identity, there are other issues within the social contract and the social construct and the social framing of our society, which basically determines the way persons with disabilities enjoy their right to legal capacity and included in the community on an equal basis with others. Thirdly, even as we talk about intersectionality and the broader conversation around identity, whether it's gender, whether it is disability, it is important to understand that we live in a context where there is limited state support and inadequate community-based services. And again, reflecting on Article 12 and the linkage with Article 19, it's about autonomy, it's about choice, it's about access to community-based services which are inclusive and responsive to the needs of persons with disabilities. But then the discussion must be broader beyond resources, because we must think of, in terms of addressing issues of intersectionality and contextual realities, we have to tap into what I call social capital. So yes, the resources might not be there, but what is available within our communities are social capital. So for example, if I'm talking about support services, we have families, we have social workers, we have community-based workers. So it's also about taking the conversation away from just being about resources and looking at what is available within a local context. The last point I want to put across is that we have to look at other underlying social factors. So within an African context, the natural form of support is the family. So the question here for me is, when support, for example, is provided by the family, what are the consequences of this in regard to the standard of support? So how do we address the issue of the centrality of will and preference within a family context in a society which is highly communal, and there's a whole aspect of collective responsibility? How do you deal with the issue of free the issue of free of conflict, that support must be free of conflict within a family setup. And then this raises a question of then, beyond identity, there are a lot of other social factors that we need to be thinking around in that particular context. I want to look at specific barriers in the context of the right to legal capacity and, of course, the whole issue of independent living. And I'm just going to use practical example based on my experience on what I do at the grassroots. So the whole issue of the first barrier is cultural norms and social prejudices. So the international legal framework is very clear that you have capacity to hold rights and you have capacity to exercise and act on those particular rights. But what happened within our cultural perspective? I am a woman. No, I'm a man, of course. I'm giving an example. I am a woman. There's an issue of inheritance within my family. I come from a rural community with a very low education level, and probably I come from a marginalized community. So the most likely scenario is that based on all those interacting and intersecting factors, I'm likely not to be able to inherit on an equal basis with other members of that particular family. So it's a multiple interaction and intersectionality of, a number of things. Then what happens if I want to access justice? The first thing I do is when you have a land issue, you go to the local village administrators. So this is probably a group of people who, 75% of them are men. They have their own social prejudices and perceptions about women and the whole issue of inheritance. So at the end of the day, it becomes difficult for me to be able even to access justice due to even the systematic challenges which exist. I want to touch on another issue about sterilization, which is very, very common, that women with disabilities, for example, they are sterilized without their consent. And this is based on the presumption that, first, you have no capacity to make decisions. Secondly, you are not in a position to take care of your children. So that's the whole rationale about that particular conversation. So it infringes on my right to legal capacity. And at the end of the day, it also affects the whole discussion around independent living and being included in the community, because I have a right to have a family as a woman with disability. The other thing I want to highlight is about lack of effective implementation of legal framework towards the full and effective participation and representation of women with disabilities and children with disabilities. So, for example, independent living is about inclusion. It's about full and effective participation in society. So when you develop legislative frameworks which are not properly implemented, then you deny women and children to have a voice and choice to participate and be members of a society on an equal basis with others. And I think, thirdly, if we're talking about independent living and the whole discussion around legal capacity, and with a specific focus on independent living, it's about developing services which are responsive and inclusive of persons with disabilities, how can I have a choice when the services are not inclusive within my communities? I want to reflect lastly on the issue of children with disabilities. How many organizations of persons with disabilities actually invite children with disabilities to express their views in matters that affect children with disabilities? And my last point is about older persons with disabilities. So again, in my context, families take the responsibility of providing care for older persons with disabilities. And this is because of two things: high levels of poverty and limited state support. So how do you exercise autonomy when you're fully dependent on your family due to those overarching and intersecting issues? Then the last point, which is super important, especially to older person, in relation to legal capacity, is that the discussion, so I said largely guardianship in Africa is informal, but for older persons, there's a small distinction. So when older persons are rich and they are wealthy, then the families, because it's about fighting for the property, it's about fighting for property, they will go to courts of law. But for ordinary families, the deprivation of legal capacity will happen informally. So then that shows the interaction between disability, older person, and socio-economic status of older person in terms of realizing the right to legal capacity and being fully included and participating in the community on an equal basis with others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that connects us back again to the idea of intersectionality as being about the multiple ways in which we can connect through childhood to older age, and thinking also about the structures, socioeconomic structures that sustain and create privilege. Delighted now to introduce our next speaker, Stella Ryker, who's from the Pontificia Universidade de Católica de São Paulo. Sorry for my Portuguese.
Okay. First of all, thank you for having me here.
Sorry, excuse me. Just speak into the mic there, please.
Over here?
Yeah.
It's on. Okay. Can you guys hear me well? Okay, so I came today to tell you a bit of a story of Gabriela. Gabriela is a person with intellectual disability that was institutionalized in a shelter for persons with disabilities in the state of Ceará, in Brazil. At the time, she was 18 years old. She was under guardianship, and her guardian was the director of the shelter where she was living in. The staff of the shelter says that Gabriela was sexually exploited when living with her family. She got pregnant and had a daughter in the shelter. Gabriela's daughter, Mariana, was separated from her when she was 6 months and was put in another shelter. Gabriela used to visit her daughter once or twice a week when there was transport available. And the state of Ceará filed against Gabriela a legal procedure to dismiss her parental authority in order for Mariana, her daughter, to be adopted. The judge in charge of the case should nominate someone, and possibly the director of the shelter, who is the official guardian of Gabriela, to represent Gabriela in court. Gabriela says that her dream is to leave the shelter and take care of her daughter. and that she would not like to see her daughter growing up locked up inside the shelter. When we talk about legal capacity, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the situation of Gabriela. So, as you all know, I mean, this is nothing new, but legal capacity is a core right in the CRPD. So I don't really think we can talk about other rights without recognizing the importance and the centrality of Article 12 in the Convention. So yesterday we were discussing about international law and some reservations made to Article 12. How come we can have reservations regarding the right to legal capacity? How are we going to ensure people with disabilities their rights if they're not recognized their right to legal capacity? I mean, it doesn't really make sense to me. So when we talk about Article 12 and about equal recognition before the law, we are talking about legal personality in one side, so the right to be entitled to rights, but also the right to exercise rights, right? To us, it might seem like very obvious that we're talking about having rights and exercising rights, but it's not so obvious. By the time when the convention was drafted, there was this whole discussion because the meaning of legal capacity differs from country to country. In some countries, it's just the right to have rights. In some other countries, it's the right to exercise rights. So it is really important to make sure that everyone understands that when we're talking about legal capacity, it's both things together. It doesn't really help to have a right insured on the paper, insured in a civil code, and not being able to put that in practice. So based on that, I'm going to tell you a bit what's going on in Brazil in terms of legislation. And you guys are going to help me to think about the situation of Gabriela now. I mean, the whole story, it's true about what happened to her. And then let's see if you think that based on the legislation, her situation is better or not. And then we can discuss furthermore, what do we need to do in order for her situation to actually get better? So Brazil ratified the CRPD with a constitutional status. So that means that the convention went through this specific procedure within the two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. And it was the first human rights treaty entering the country with such a status, meaning that today the CRPD in Brazil, it's like our constitution. Okay, so we did a great effort for that to happen, and so that's what we have now. In 2016, entered in force another law called the Brazilian Inclusion Law of Persons with Disabilities. It was a very old bill project that when the convention came up, the legislators reviewed the bill project, to be according to the convention. And it entered in force in 2016. And the Brazilian Inclusion Law, which I'm going to be calling LBI, okay, changed our civil code. So we did some advocacy work, and pretty much the whole thing regarding legal capacity in Brazil has been changed. So now we have the federal constitution, right? And the CRPD is right there. So the first thing is the concept, right? I won't say definition, but who are considered persons with disabilities? So pretty much our law repeated the text of the convention and recognized that a person with a disability is the one who has a long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairment, which in interaction with one or more barriers may hinder its full and effective participation in life. So we recognized that there is two different types of disability. I mean, there is intellectual disability and there is mental disability. Why is it so important to have both things in law? Because you know about all the discussion from the convention, right? If we would be able to include psychosocial disability or not. So in Brazil, we made sure that both terms are there in the Civil Code. We made sure as well to make sure that the right to exercise legal capacity was ensured, right? So this is really important. Regarding guardianship, in Brazil before that, we used to have total and partial guardianship. Although we couldn't move all the way through the view of the CRPD that would lead us to a non-intervention at all, right, no interdiction at all, we moved halfway, which is already something good, right? So in Brazil now, the law still provides for interdiction, but not based on disability. We changed the civil code, so disability cannot be considered a reason to put someone under guardianship. As well as understanding, the whole issue of understanding used to be a reason for putting a person under guardianship, and it's no longer a reason. So who can be put under guardianship nowadays? The ones who are addicted to drugs, the ones who are alcoholists, the ones who are prodigal. I didn't write that because it's not really concerned to our conversation. But then what it's interesting for us to think about, it's the ones who cannot express their will, and I have a point here, and also the guardianship can only fall under patrimonial and negotiable acts. So no other right will be challenged, even if a person is under guardianship. My point here concerning the person who cannot express the will, it's good and it's not, right? In some way, we are saying that disability is not, it's no longer an issue, but who are the ones who cannot express will, right? So when we talk about a person with an intellectual disability, would a judge think that the person cannot express will? I don't know. I'm sure a person with an intellectual disability is totally able to express will, in most cases, with support. But we don't really know how this will be received by the judges, how the courts are going to be ruling this, right? Another example, like a deaf person who was not oralized, didn't learn how to speak, and, for example, didn't learn sign language. How we would deal with that? Would a judge understand that this person is not able to express will? So we still have some challenges, but the important thing is at least the guardianship now is limited to negotiable and patrimonial acts. So the law stands expresses that the person can marry, can exercise sexual and reproductive rights, can decide on the number of children, preserve fertility. So the issue of a compulsory sterilization in the civil code, it's now not a problem, although we still have a law specifically talking about sterilization that still needs to be reviewed, okay? To exercise the right to family and community life, right to custody, to adoption, to being adopted, adopting. So we did good progress. The law also makes it clear that the definition of guardianship does not affect the right of a person to her own body, to sexuality, to marriage, to privacy, education, to health, to work, and to vote. So when we think about laws, I mean, we're doing good, right? Good scenario in Brazil. So we talk about equal opportunities. There is a specific provision on the law explaining what is discrimination on the grounds of disability. We didn't have that before. And then there is this whole discussion going on in Brazil, like when we start recognizing legal capacity, we are saying that people with disabilities must be responsible for their acts, right? If we are recognizing that they are able to, then they might also be responsible for their decisions. And then those that are not very into the legal capacity thing keep questioning that we are no longer recognizing vulnerability. And why the issue of vulnerability is important, at least according to the Brazilian legislation, Vulnerability is connected to prescription, it's connected to some other rights that are ensured to persons who are considered vulnerable, right? So my point here is that, in my point of view, when we're talking about recognizing legal capacity, it doesn't mean ignoring vulnerability. One thing is recognizing legal capacity. The other thing is how we deal with vulnerability, okay? What I found as a basis for that, and this is what I've been advocating for, is that the Brazilian Civil Code states that for the purposes of the protection referred, children, adolescents, women, and the elderly with disabilities are considered especially vulnerable. So we still have a lot of work to do and to make it happen in practice. But I think we have quite a pretty good legal background for that. Concerning supported decision-making, I think this is something that I'm the first one bringing good news, maybe, or not good news, I don't know. We've finally included in our legal system a mechanism of supported decision-making, so to allow persons with disabilities to make choices. How does the Brazilian system is provided for? The person should elect two persons that that the person is in contact with, somebody who is trustful. It's pretty much an agreement, like a contract. And then on this document, the person would say in what areas of life she needs support, for how long does she need support. It can be for a specific thing or for a long-term period. What are the limits of the support, the respect for the will and preferences of the person. Everything must be written down. And then this document is presented to a judge, and then actually the judge is the one to say, okay, let's sign it. So in a way, it's still under the judiciary power, the decision of formalizing or not. And there are specific things here, like in case the supporter does not want to support anymore, he can communicate the judge. There are procedural issues that I don't want to get into it, but we had the system, and pretty much now we are trying to make it practical. Judges do not really know yet what to do. The public defender's office neither, the public attorney's office neither. And if these bodies are not prepared, I'm sure we're not going to make it happen. And then what I see here, it's the situation of Gabriela improved, right, in terms of legislation, because when the whole story of Gabriela happened, we didn't have the CRPD and we didn't have the Brazilian inclusion law. But I think when it comes to legal capacity specifically, we have a couple challenges. First of all, we need to start looking at legal capacity not under the lenses of the civil code as a patrimonial thing. This is a heritage that we carry. Civilists all over are denying legal capacity based on a patrimonial view. What we are saying is that we need to recognize persons with disabilities as right holders under a human rights perspective. So this is the first thing. The second thing is that we need to recognize the right to commit mistakes and to take risks. Families are really afraid of the whole idea of legal capacity because their children are in danger, right? They're going to be making decisions. They're going to be the ones ruling their lives. And it is a bit scary. But isn't it for all of us? We need to have the right to make decisions and to commit mistakes. And that's how it should be. For us, it's the same. Recognize that persons with disabilities have different needs and require different support to achieve similar goals. So my point here is that when we talk about equal recognition before the law, equality must be understood within diversity, in diversity. So there's not equality for all. It's equality in diversity. And also we need to recognize the right to difference. People have the right to be different. We need also to recognize that human beings experience peculiarities that directly influence how every person with a disability experiences life and disadvantaged situations and deal with them. So this has to do with the previous presentations, and we definitely need to address that. Guys, we need to listen to persons with disabilities and their needs. We need to hear their will and preferences and their desires. Like, persons with disabilities have the right to participate. They have the right to speak up. So we need to allow them to. We need to address how individuals are being able to cherish their rights according to their personal features and their social context, and I think this is where intersectionality comes into. And pretty much, I think we should start thinking outside the box. Like the sir here today mentioned Amartya Sen, and I would refer here to the capabilities approach, because I think we need to understand that beyond the disability world, there are other things that we should start to consider. We definitely need to consider that in order to address disabilities, in order to address that the situation of women, of children, of elderly with disabilities need a special lenses. So we need to start looking at poverty, we need to start looking to social roles, we need to start looking to other things that I'm not sure we have been looking properly. And finally, we need data and statistics. Like, without information, I don't think we are going to be able to address anything. So I don't know how is it in your countries, but I can say that in Brazil, we are really lacking data and statistics on how the situation of persons with disabilities are progressing. So hopefully the situation of Gabriela will be better soon. We are working towards that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stella. And again, it's really important for us here in Ireland at the moment to think about new models and better models for supportive decision-making, and also to remind us of the significance of data in bringing visibility to the various intersecting axes of exclusion that can be experienced and how to challenge those. Our final speaker this afternoon is Professor Gabor Gombos, who is an adjunct professor here at the Centre for Disability Law and Policy and a world-renowned activist and human rights defender on disability rights, in particular on the rights of people with psychosocial disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is almost the end of the day, except the party, the wine reception, and the poster session, which is also part of the daily program. So I guess that not only I am a little bit tired, but if I am not going to be very clear as a speaker in my 15 minutes presentation, then this is not because of my exhaustion. It is because unlike most of the time when I am trying to think through very carefully what messages I want to convey, and I am trying to organize the material in a more or less clear structure, this time I cannot do that. Why? Because my views I want to share, and I want to share, are not particularly certain. So this is sharing of some uncertain views. You can challenge them. You are actually invited to challenge them. I have no too much emotional affiliation to what I am going to tell you, although it's significant part of my life also. I will start with a real global bird's eye view on where this wonderful and beautiful planet, in my view, is at the moment. I wanted to be an astrophysicist because I really love astronomy, and I think that one of the arguably most beautiful planets is our planet. So I am focusing on the global challenges, and then I will try to tell you something about legal capacity and community living and people with disabilities in an intersectional context, if I can. But before I am afraid that I will run out of time or I will forget by the end of the speech, that I wanted to make the link with legal capacity and right to live in the community, let me, in the beginning, tell you why I think that these two are important. Actually, my colleagues, both colleagues, already addressed this and many earlier speakers. Imagine, I think it's an impossible thing to imagine, but let us use our creative mind and skill of abstraction. So let us theoretically assume that there is a person who can exercise all the substantive rights international human rights instruments have generated and recognized so far, except legal capacity and what is behind it, and I am not going to repeat what is behind it, and accept the right to live in a community on an equal basis with others. What would be the life of this person? I would say that it would be a very bad and unjust life, because you would not be seen in a rule of law society as a person directly to deal with or to be in contact with because your legal capacity is denied, and you would have no choice on your living environment and arrangements, as well as your community affiliations. And if you cannot have a say on which communities are your communities, and now I am making a link with Amita's presentation and also to some extent Luke's presentation, intersectionality also means that you belong to intersecting communities. Now, if you are forced to be part of only one community, say a person with disability, forced to either directly and violently forced to, or due to the lack of support to have a place in another community than the one which is designed for poor people with disabilities, then you will not have a full life. You have no chance for a full life. Even if you can exercise your life, your right to work, your right to marriage, your right to whatever. So, again, a link to Amita's work. Her book is called Legal Order and Mental Disorder, and I think, for me, it is a very telling title. And this is a link with my uncertainty and the rest of the lecture. What is the most relevant global challenge to the implementation of the right to universal legal capacity with support and the right to live in the community and independently with support? In my opinion, number one reason is that there is a very deep-rooted fear. Most of the time we are not talking about it. It's not PC, but it's very much there in basically every segment of our societies, that if some people's lives are not properly controlled, then it can result in legal and social disorder and chaos and anarchy and whatever. Our modern time, and basically I primarily speak about post-Second World War situation, globally has been developed in the, I would say, failed belief that very clear-cut policies in a democratic environment, safeguarded and monitored, can be the ground for the common social good and human rights instruments can also be used as some vehicles to promote a world which is driven by this belief. So let me repeat it a bit more clearly. The presumption is that the world, including society, is a certain place. If we make smart policies with all the requisite safeguards and human rights, whatever, then not many unexpected things may disrupt social and legal order. So it's a safe place to live in. Okay, some people may have to be marginalized, occasionally even segregated, to ensure that for the vast majority, this safety and security and certainty will be there. It's a very utilitarian approach, in a sense. But for a long time, most people believed that this was the best thing to do for practical social policies. I'm not talking about theories of justice and some radical social change movements. I am talking about the everyday policymakers and policy executors who until now want to have clear boxes. Who are the people who can enter my policy? They are gatekeepers in a sense, and they don't like the idea of intersectionality, because then which box? And which box enables them to have an access to vote? And how shall I decide? And I have an accountability because I am using public resources. I cannot do that arbitrarily. And they are right, they cannot do that arbitrarily. And they also want to have very certain answers to questions. What will happen if in a very particular situation, for instance, a person with whatever cognitive impairment will cause a big trouble? Who will be liable? Tell me who should do what exactly, so that I will have no space for arbitrariness. I just need to follow a very simple algorithm, and then I, as a policymaker, can know what I am supposed to do. I am again in a very safe and certain situation. Now, if we look around the globe, that is what I submit, then we have to understand that the world is far less certain than we had believed. And pretending that it is still a certain world is not necessarily a good strategy. Now, you can name hundreds of global issues, which I think demonstrate that what I am saying has some truth ground. If you look at the migration issue, which is a real issue, it is severely abused by some countries' politics, including my own country, shamefully. There are deep human rights implications and violations on a daily basis to migrant people. But there is a global migration. There must be causes behind them. And yet we are very uncertain what sort of policy answers could be better than not having an answer, or simply building up fences and walls around our countries and lock up people who are not necessarily simple migrants. They may be just refugees and don't care about human rights in general. Now, most people are intersectional beings, and for me, one of the best evidence-based examples is Facebook. The very idea of Facebook, I think, is that if you sign up to your communities, I'm a football fan, I am a person with disability, I am gay, I am poor, I am this or that, then in a very small number of steps, making contacts to your Facebook friends belonging to one of these communities, you can reach the President of the United States. And this works for most people because we really belong to so many communities. Our communities are intersectional, that it is working. But it will not work for someone who was, for instance, born with a disability, an impairment, locked up in a special orphanage which serves babies with disabilities. And then you spend the rest of your life in various institutional settings because you may even not be aware that there are other communities than those who had spent their entire life in institutional settings. But this can be equally said about some baby, you know, who as part of a migration or asylum seeking grows up in a refugee camp. So now, what can we do that people, in very practical terms, can recognize that they really belong to intersecting communities? Very often, some of the oversimplified slogans used in those communities may contradict to one another, which I think is a great thing, because that is who we are. Uncertainties also are accompanied by contradictions, which are not necessarily bad. So many people who would need the positive side of intersectionality Amita was talking about are in a position that they cannot really recognize that they are beings like ones who belong to several communities, which could give a synergy and could give a sort of support to work towards a better position for you as an individual with all your intersecting properties in our societies. I really like that both yesterday and today, many of the speakers, when they were asked tricky questions, had the courage to answer that I don't know, I have no solution. Now, I think that most policymakers are in the same situation. They are just not courageous enough of what their conflict of interest with their position they hold prevents them to publicly announce that I don't know, I have no answer. Now, this is something which again contributes to uncertainty. My suggestion, or if you like, my hope is that if we are creative and we use our intersecting communities on the micro level, on the ground level, on middle level, on regional level and international level, then we can come up with new, not final solutions, but trials to build up a new kind of policy, which really considers the intersecting nature of human existence. And I think that you can hardly expect that this can be effectively initiated on the top level. I think it is surprising enough that the UN managed to produce the CRPD. Now I really think that our micro communities are the best placed, in my opinion, in most of our societies to, if you like, experiment in the positive sense with new approaches of policies, just recognizing the resources, the connectivity resources we have in those environments, and then some coordination mechanisms built up among or across those micro communities. You can have a higher level network where you can learn from those micro initiatives. I really do think that this is something which is worth to try, and I'm aware that some communities do it across the globe in various challenging issues. We need to rely in it in a more conscious way. The very last thing, if I am focusing on disability side of the intersectionality, one of the challenges is the huge gap between the quote-unquote everyday person with disability and the leaders of the disability movements. It's a huge gap, and we have to find a way to bridge that gap, because if people do not know that they have rights, then their rights are meaningless. Thank you.